Hello everybody, Joel Logan with A Hole in the Ground Terrain. Welcome to our latest tutorial video. Today we're going to be talking about making one of the most common pieces of terrain people use in wargaming, and that's hills. We're going to be focusing in more on angular stepped hills than anything. We're not going to be talking about making realistic smooth hills. The primary purpose of what we're doing for games such as Battletech, and I'm also making this for the upcoming Robotech game that's coming out. But the primary purpose of this is two things. To block line of sight. Here's a typical Battletech miniature. You can see that two stacks of a hill, this is stackable, is going to block line of sight to this guy. So not only to block line of sight, but also we want to have edges that we can set our miniatures on. If the terrain is realistic and rounded and smooth, some of these miniatures are going to fall over. So what we're doing isn't necessarily realistic, but it's good for wargaming. It's what people have been doing for years. We're going to concentrate on this methodology. Alright, so there's several things you're going to need, guys. We're going to need 1 to 2 inch foam. We're not going to be using 1/2 inch foam. That's too small. It may be okay for 15mm gaming or something like that, but for the purposes of what we're doing, you need at least 1 to 2 inch foam. This is inch foam. This is going to be a piece of 2 inch foam. Okay, you're going to need something to cut it with. Let me reach over here and grab my cutter. Hand that to me there. And you've seen this in prior videos. What I recommend is a Hot Wire Foam Factory or other brand, but a plunge cutter. This is going to work better than any tool. It's very simple. We're going to get into how to use it. I don't think you're going to be able to use an X-Acto or cutting knife very well. If that's all you've got, it may work, but what I recommend is a foam cutter. And of course you're going to need paint and flocking, which we'll get into later in the video. So stay tuned. We're going to start here in just a minute. We're going to jump in how to design a basic set of stackable hills. Alright guys, we're going to jump right into making some tiered hills here in just a second. So in preparation for this tutorial, I went ahead and I've made a few hills, but we're going to make one as well. Now, in our methodology we're going to go through, we're going to start with the top piece first. We're going to just make a 2-tiered hill, but what I like to do is I like to number them. So, for instance, this is 2C, hill number 2, C being the 3rd level, 2B, you can see there, and 2A. So the reason we're going to start with the top layer, we're going to start with the smallest piece, trace it on the next smallest piece, and if we were doing a 3rd layer, we would trace it above. That way we're going to overlap each size a little bit so we get it right. And to give you just a little bit of scale here, here's a dragon. I believe this is a dragon Battletech miniature. And Robotech miniatures should be a similar scale when they come out. So let's go ahead and jump into cutting our first hill out. Alright, so for this video I've found 2 scrap pieces of foam. Remember, I told you don't use less than 1 inch thick. So for all you need right now, we need some type of marker, pen, pencil. I like to use a Sharpie marker because it can show up. So this is going to be the top level of our hill. So let's draw it out here. And we're going to try to take advantage of as much of this foam as we can. Alright, so this is going to be our top piece here. Now, I'm going to set our larger piece of foam down for right now. And I've had this on for a minute. And this is my plunge cutter. This is what I like to use. Now, we're not going to be able to get quite the size of this hill because we want to angle it. If you remember my other hills a minute ago, they were angled. So let's go ahead and plunge this in. Now you notice I'm holding it at an angle. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm going to go around at an angle very slowly. And this is going to take a minute. But I don't want to cut it just straight. I want it to have the illusion of a hill or a mountain, you know, with that angle. And I don't know if you can see it, but I've got it just about to the edge, bottom edge for an angle here. And this will take some time. You got to be patient. And like I've always said on other tutorials, don't push the cutter. Let it move on its own pace. If you push on it, you're going to bend it and you can possibly break the wire out of this. So we're going to keep going around. And remember, this may not be 100% realistic. Like any terrain, it's about look and scalability. Because as we know, looking at contours, you know, they're going to be smoother and not quite as jagged. But it's okay. The main purpose of these hills, besides just looking good on your gaming table, is you want to block line of sight. And if we're accomplishing that, that's half the battle right there. So let's go ahead. Still got some cutting left to do. Let's pop this first little piece off. So you can see here how good that looks. And we still got a little bit to go, so let's keep going. Let's angle it. And remember, we're doing the top piece first because we're going to be tracing this here in just a moment onto the next piece of foam. Now you don't have to do it that way. It's just the way I like to do it. It helps you envision a little more what the next tier is. Alright. So we got a little bit of strings left on there, guys, but that's okay. We'll go through how to clean these up in a little while. Alright guys, having a square piece or rectangular piece doesn't make this as important, but we could trace this on. We don't have to, but holding this piece up here, I'm going to try to roughly follow the shape of what I've cut out. You can see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to try to take advantage of as much of this foam as I can. So you can imagine topography or scale, we're sloping up. Now a word to the wise, if you're storing this in some type of crate or box or storage container, don't make your heels bigger than the box you're going to put it in. That may sound very kind of silly, but always think about what you're going to store this in so you can put it up later. Alright, so you see we've kind of traced around a rough shape of our top tier here. And let's go ahead and cut this out. Alright guys, so anytime working with this type of foam, you have all these fibers. Hopefully you can see that a little bit. And it may be fine to see on the camera, but it looks like little hairs and fibers. And when you paint, primer and paint, these will clump up and show up. So one trick I learned watching another tutorial video, find you an old toothbrush and we're going to scrub on it, and we won't get everything, but goodness, we'll be able to get a lot of this off. And just by rubbing on it with your fingers and a toothbrush, we're going to try to get as much of these fibers off. So I'm not going to bore you with me watching or with you watching me scrub a bunch of pieces, but you get the idea. Take you a toothbrush and with your fingers, try to get as much of these fibers off as possible, and when you paint it, this will look better. So I'm going to clean on some of these pieces for a while, and then our next step will be primering, and we're going to go over that a little bit. Hello everybody, so I've cleaned all the fiber off the foam best I could, and I've watered down some black acrylic paint, got me a large paintbrush. I'm going to paint these down best I can, probably let it dry overnight. So I'm going to paint these, skip ahead, I won't bore you with watching me paint these pieces black, but I'm going to go ahead and paint them, then we'll jump ahead. Alright everybody, through the magic of editing, all of the pieces I showed you earlier have been primered black. Now remember, this is foam. If you use regular spray paint, it's going to crumble up into nothing. So everything's black. So let's talk about the next step. You see I got two things of acrylic paint out. Now you can paint these tons of different paint schemes. If you've seen from my prior videos, my Cavern and Mines, it's like a grayish format, okay? So what I'm going to do, I plan to use these a lot for Battletech and Robotech RPG tactics. So I'm going to paint two primary colors to start with. This is going to be brown, this is going to be green. And then I'm not going to do a ton of flocking, I'm just going to do a little bit after that. But let's paint all these up, brown and green. I'll show you that, then we'll talk about some flocking methods. Alright everybody, so it's been a little while. I have did a lot of painting on these over the past 2 days. One of my methodologies is I'll do stuff, let it dry overnight. You don't have to do that. The terrain's in different stages. Some of it I've moved on to flocking, but don't worry, we're going to go through the whole process. So this is one of the pieces we've built from scratch. We've been going through these two pieces here. Alright, so if you remember, we primered everything black, and I didn't do the brown solid. I did a good bit of dry brushing, so some of the black would still come through. And now you may notice some texturing in this. This will disappear when we flock it. 2 different times I painted the tops of all of my hill pieces green, and I could have used airbrush, but I chose just to use a normal brush. And so twice I went back and just painted it green acrylic paint. And if you wanted to, you could even stop right now and you wouldn't have to flock it. But we're going to go on how to do some very simple basic flocking in the next step. So let's move on to that. Alright guys, so we've got 2 pieces here that we've completely painted, brown and green. And the first thing we're going to do, we're going to need 2 things for this step. We're going to spread out glue pretty evenly. I've got an old beat up brush, and I've got my Aleene's tacky glue. You can use any sorts of white glue, PVA glue some people call it. So let's start here by just trying to squirt out a good bit on here. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Nothing complex. I want to keep it just on the green portion though. So I'm going to go around the perimeter of the piece. Then I'm going to just make some rows back and forth. And we're not going to cover 100% of this in flock. You know, I watch people sometimes make hills in terrain, and it just looks like the flock exploded when they're done. We don't want to do that. We're just going to do some very light flocking on this. Let's get some on the other piece here. Right. And you may have saw prior, I've already started this on a couple of other pieces. And like I was telling you before, I'm looking for more of a Terran feel for this set. You could go volcanic, and you could go into all sorts of different kind of paint jobs. So with my old beat up brush here, remember, I'm not going for 100% coverage. So if there's areas that don't have glue on it, that is perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. We don't want to cover it and make it look like a bag of flock just exploded everywhere. Remember, it's all about scale. I'm not really designing this for 28mm, even though they could possibly be used at that scale. This is more for 1 to 285 6mm scale. So you see, I'm just taking my old brush here, trying to spread it out pretty decent. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put this in water. I'm going to clean it good so hopefully I don't ruin the brush. Now, I've got 2 bags of flocking here. Let me reach down and grab the first one. Now, I've had this flocking a while. I believe it's Woodland Scenics. This is not fiber. This is the fine. Let me see if I can hold some here for you to see. This is just the fine type, and I believe this is some Woodland Scenics I've had for years and years. So I'm just going to pinch off a little bit at a time, and I'm going to spread it on. I'm not going to just clump it on and go nuts here. Go ahead and set this one here. So I'm going to keep reaching in the bag and just barely moving my fingers here. I'm going to keep grabbing and putting more and more on here, guys. I don't want it very thick, so I'm just doing a little bit at a time. Doing that on purpose. I don't want to have a clump explosion. And we're going to put just a little bit of really fine sand. I believe that may be some Woodland Scenics I bought years and years ago. One thing you'll find, guys, unless you go nuts with this stuff, some of this flocking may last you 10 years or more. The only time I've ever used significant amounts is making some hobbit holes, which you may have saw in some of my earlier videos. This stuff, if you're careful with it, will last you a really, really long time. And depending on where you're at in the US or overseas, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, if you have some model railroad stores, they carry a good selection of this stuff. But at your basic Hobby Lobby or Michael's, they have the very simple stuff. Now this is a very high-tech tool. I'm going to take my finger here and I'm going to work this stuff in. I'm just going to pat it down with my finger here. I'm going to spread it just a little bit as I go. What I'm doing, I'm trying to work it into the glue. If you've ever worked with terrain or transported it, you know, you'll take it around and it'll fall off, you know. The stuff will fall off over time. So we want to make sure it's bonding really good with the glue. Alright, so we've got that one done. Let's go ahead and tamp this one down a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to go back with just a little more here. A little more flocking. Not going to go nuts though. One thing I hope to use this for, of course, is different Battletech missions, but hope to do when Robotech RPG Tactics come out, a lot of malcontents battles in the South American jungles, and hope to use this a lot for that. Now you may wonder what my next layer of flocking is, and like I told you a minute ago, I really like to use the, I've got some very fine sand. It didn't come out of my creek in my backyard. This is some I bought a while back, and I'm not going to use much of this at all, but I think it just looks really good. It puts a very nice contrast into the colors. So just a little bit, I'm going to sprinkle it on some of my areas of glue that are still showing. I've seen a lot of terrain, and this just gives it a really nice effect here. I'm going to go around the edges here a little bit with some of it. Hopefully you can see I'm just grabbing a little bit and parsing it out with my fingers. Not going to go crazy. And maybe just a little bit here in the middle. I'll put a lot of it out. Let's put some over here on this piece. Alright, and I'm going to tamp in some of my sand as well with my finger. Like I said, I'm just trying to work it in with the glue. I'll try to get it to stay. And one trick a friend of mine showed me a long time ago, anytime you're working with flocking, you can blow on it a little bit, and that helps work it in a little bit too. If you're using the fibers, it'll give it kind of a wind-blown effect. And I've seen people use like a static machine that does the same thing. Keep working that in. Alright guys, we're going to skip ahead. I'm going to let this dry overnight before I fool with it again. I'm going to do a few more pieces, and I'm going to skip ahead, and then our next step will probably be, we may do some touching up, but I believe our final step is going to be sealing this with some sealant that is safe for foam. I've heard some people call it grasscrete on YouTube before, but the final step with the sealant is going to make this flocking hard, and it's going to make it bond with the foam, and it's going to make it durable and last for years to come. So let's skip ahead. Let's let this dry for a day. Maybe we'll look at it all, then we'll seal it. Alright everybody, so I've let this dry overnight after flocking it real good. You can see my results. Pretty happy with it. I could stop here, but I am going to seal it with some sealant that's safe for foam, and like I said, that will help solidify the flocking and make it stronger. So I'm going to jump ahead and seal it and let that dry, and then show that to you.